Mafia boss dragged her from the fire, not knowing she was the one who set his empire ablaze. The fog rolling off the Atlantic did not cleanse Port Argyll. It merely dampened the grime, sealing the city in a permanent, briny humidity that smelled of diesel fuel and old money. To the tourists passing through on their way to the coast, the city was a marvel of modern construction and neon-lit casinos. To the locals, it was a living organism that breathed because Dante Moretti allowed it to inhale. Dante Moretti stood 20 stories above the harbor, looking down at the black water through the floor-to-ceiling glass of his office. He was a man composed of sharp lines and expensive tailoring, his suit cut from Italian wool that absorbed the dim light of the room. At 32, he had the eyes of a man twice his age, dark, unyielding, and utterly devoid of naivety. The Moretti Syndicate did not just run Port Argyll. They were the rebar in the concrete, the electricity in the grid. From the shipping containers moving millions in untaxed luxury goods to the construction contracts that rebuilt the skyline, nothing moved without Dante nodding his head. He turned from the window, his movement fluid and predatory. Across the mahogany desk, a union representative sat sweating. Despite the aggressive air conditioning, we cannot squeeze another percentage point out of the dock workers. Mr. Moretti, the man stammered, wiping his upper lip. They are already working double shifts. Dante did not raise his voice. He never had to. Violence was a tool for the incompetent. Silence was the weapon of the king. He walked to his chair and sat, the leather creaking softly in the quiet room. "You are mistaken," Dante said, his voice a low baritone that vibrated with authority. "You are looking at the numbers as if they are negotiable. The shipment arriving on Tuesday requires 24-hour processing. If your men are tired, hire more men. If you lack the funds, check the envelope I had sent to your home address this morning. It should cover the overtime. And a new roof for your summer house." The representative swallowed hard, the bribe hanging in the air like smoke. He nodded, gathered his briefcase, and fled. Dante watched him go, his expression unchanged. Loyalty in Port Argyll was rarely bought with love. It was purchased with fear and silver, and Dante had an abundance of both. 3 miles away, in a cramped motel room that smelled of mildew and stale cigarettes, Lena Hart stared at her reflection in a cracked mirror. She hardly recognized the woman looking back. Her hair, once a vibrant chestnut, was now dyed a harsh, flat black. She wore heavy glasses she did not need and clothing that was 2 sizes too big, designed to swallow her figure and make her invisible. In her mind, she was not Lena Hart, the logistics coordinator from Chicago. She was a ghost. She was the ash left over from a fire that had burned out a long time ago. She closed her eyes, and the memory assaulted her as it always did. The heat, the screaming of the smoke alarms in the tenement building, the way the door handle had seared the skin of her palm, and then the small, terrifying silence from the bedroom down the hall where her younger brother, Toby, had been sleeping. The official report had called it faulty wiring. Lena knew better. The building was owned by a shell company connected to the Moretti Empire, a slumlord operation funded by the narcotics trade that flowed through this very port. They had cut corners on safety to squeeze out more profit for their drug buys. Toby had died because a rounding error in a ledger mattered more to the Moretti family than human life. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a burner, a cheap plastic device that felt like a shackle. She answered it without a greeting. "Are you ready?" The voice on the other end was distorted, but she knew the cadence. It was Miller, the former federal agent who ran the justice group she had fallen in with. He was a man consumed by his own failures, obsessed with taking down the syndicate that had ended his career. "I am ready," Lena whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Miller did not offer comfort. "Do not hesitate, Lena. Tonight is not about property damage. It is about bleeding them. That warehouse on the South Docks is their central cash reserve for the quarter. We burn that. We freeze their operations for months. It stops the shipments. It stops the poison." Lena looked down at her hands. They were shaking. She clenched them into fists until her knuckles turned white. I know the plan. Miller, you are the only one who can do this. He pressed, his tone shifting to a manipulative softness. You know fire. You know how buildings breathe. Do this for Toby. The name hit her like a physical blow. Lena hung up the phone and tossed it onto the bed. She walked to the small table where a blueprint of the warehouse was spread out, weighed down by bottles of accelerant and timing devices. She had spent 3 weeks scouting the location. She knew the rotation of the guards down to the second. She knew the sprinkler system had a 10-second delay before the main valve opened, a valve she intended to sabotage. She was an architect of ruin, constructing a disaster with the same precision she used to apply to supply chains. But beneath the cold determination, fear churned in her gut. She was not a criminal. She was a sister with a hole in her heart, terrified that in seeking justice, she was becoming the very monster she despised. The warehouse on the South Docks was a fortress of corrugated steel and shadow. It sat apart from the main shipping lines, unassuming and dark. Inside, however, it was a vault. Pallets of shrink-wrapped currency, illegal import bonds, and high-value electronics sat in towering rows. It was 2 a.m. The air was thick with the threat of rain. Lena moved through the shadows of the loading bay, dressed in dark maintenance coveralls. She had bypassed the outer perimeter lock using a cloned key card Miller had provided. Now, she was inside the belly of the beast. The smell of dust and cardboard was overwhelming. She moved quickly, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She placed the first incendiary device near the structural support column in the east wing. It was a magnesium-based compound, designed to burn hot enough to melt steel and ensure the water suppression system would be useless. Check the time, she told herself. Focus. She moved to the center of the warehouse. This was the most dangerous part. She had to climb the gantry to disable the heat sensors. Her breath hitched as she heard footsteps echoing on the concrete floor below. She froze, pressing herself flat against the metal grating of the catwalk. Below her, 2 guards walked a slow circuit. They were laughing, talking about a boxing match, their flashlight beams cutting through the gloom. I told you, put 50 on the kid, one guard said, his voice echoing. Lena held her breath, her hand gripping a canister of gel accelerant. If they looked up, it was over. If she made a sound, she was dead. The Moretti men did not call the police for intruders. They passed beneath her, the heavy steel door clanging shut behind them as they exited to the smoking area. Lena exhaled, the sound loud in her own ears. She scrambled down the ladder, her movements frantic now. The schedule was tight. She had 6 minutes before the next patrol. She set the final charge near the main office, where the records were kept. She wired the timer. 5 minutes. Her hands shook so badly she dropped the wire strippers. They clattered on the floor, the sound sharp and piercing in the silence. She froze, waiting. Nothing. Just the hum of the ventilation units. She stood up, wiping sweat from her forehead. It was done. She turned to head for the side exit she had propped open, but as she rounded the corner of a massive stack of crates, a beam of light hit her face. "Hey!" someone shouted. Lena did not think. She ran. Across the city, the Velvet Room was a sanctuary of gold leaf and red velvet. It was a private club where the music was soft, the drinks were aged 30 years, and the clientele spoke in hushed tones. Dante sat in a corner booth, a glass of whiskey untouched in front of him. A beautiful woman in a shimmering silver dress sat beside him, her hand resting on his forearm. She was talking about a gallery opening, but Dante was not listening. He felt a prickle at the base of his neck. It was an instinct he had honed over a decade of survival, a sixth sense that whispered when the wind was about to change. His phone vibrated on the table. He picked it up. It was Marco, his head of security. "Boss," Marco said, his voice tight. "We have a sensor trip at the South Warehouse. Probably just a rat, but the perimeter alarm is silent." Dante stood up immediately. The woman beside him blinked, surprised. "Dante? I have to go," he said, not looking at her. "Dante, seriously?" she complained, her voice sharp. "You promised tonight was off limits." Dante ignored her. He was already moving toward the exit, his strides long and urgent. He signaled to his driver, waiting by the door. South Warehouse. Now. As he stepped out into the cool night air, he looked toward the docks. The sky was dark, but there was a faint, unnatural orange glow illuminating the low clouds. That is not a rat, Dante muttered, a cold knot forming in his stomach. Drive. Lena was trapped. The shout had come from a guard who had returned early from his break. She had scrambled up a service ladder, hiding atop a stack of shipping containers. But the guard was below, radioing for backup. She looked at her watch. 30 seconds. She had to get out. The devices were set to detonate in a chain reaction. If she was in here when they went off, she would be vaporized. She scanned the ceiling. There was a skylight, but it was 20 feet up. The only way out was the way she came, past the guard. Suddenly, a deafening crack split the air. The first charge detonated. The explosion was not just a sound, it was a physical force. It slammed into the rows of shelves, sending crates tumbling. A ball of white-hot fire erupted in the east wing, instantly consuming the oxygen in the room. The guard below screamed, shielding his face as a wave of heat rolled over them. Lena lost her footing as the container shook. She slid down the side, crashing onto the concrete floor hard. Pain shot through her ankle, hot and sharp. She scrambled to her feet, limping toward the side door. The second charge blew, then the third. The warehouse transformed into a hellscape. The sprinkler system hissed and then died. The pipes ruptured by the intensity of the heat. Pallets of cash caught fire. Millions of dollars curling into black ash in seconds. The roar of the fire was like a jet engine, drowning out the alarms. Lena coughed, black smoke filling her lungs. It tasted like burning plastic, the smell of her brother's death. Panic, primal and overwhelming, seized her. She could not see the door anymore. The smoke was a solid wall of gray and black. She stumbled forward, her vision blurring. A piece of burning timber fell from the ceiling, crashing inches from her. She veered left, disoriented. The heat was blistering, singeing the hair on her arms. "Help!" she croaked, but the sound was swallowed by the inferno. She tripped over a fallen debris pile and hit her head against the floor. Darkness encroached at the edges of her vision. She tried to push herself up, but her limbs felt heavy like lead. The fire was closing in, a circle of dancing, hungry light. "I am sorry, Toby," she thought, her consciousness slipping away. "I tried." She slumped forward, her cheek pressed against the hot concrete, her hand reaching out toward a salvation she could not reach. The Mercedes screeched to a halt outside the warehouse, the tires smoking. Dante threw the door open before the car had fully stopped. The scene was chaos. Flames were licking up the sides of the building, reaching 50 feet into the air. The heat was intense enough to be felt from the street. Security teams were shouting, running around the perimeter, helpless against the magnitude of the blaze. "Boss, you can't go in there," Marco shouted, running toward him. "The roof is going to come down." "Is anyone inside?" Dante roared, grabbing Marco by the lapels of his jacket. "We do not know. Shift change was messy, maybe a patrol." Dante looked at the building. It was his money burning. It was his reputation turning to ash, but beneath the monster, the city saw. There was a code. You did not leave your people to burn. He remembered the smell of his first fire, the way the screams stayed with you forever. "Stay here," Dante ordered. "Dante!" Marco screamed, but Dante was already running. He grabbed a heavy canvas tarp from the back of a maintenance truck and dunked it into a puddle of runoff water near a hydrant the men were struggling to open. He wrapped the wet, heavy fabric around his head and shoulders, covering his mouth. He kicked the side door open. The handle seared his hand even through the leather glove. He stepped into the furnace. The heat hit him like a physical blow, sucking the moisture from his eyes. Visibility was zero. He crouched low below the thickest plumes of smoke, moving on instinct. "Hello!" he shouted, his voice hoarse. "Call out!" He moved deeper, shielding his face with his arm. Debris rained down around him. A steel beam groaned and twisted above, metal screaming in agony. He saw a shape on the floor near the center aisle, a bundle of rags. No, a person. He rushed forward, ignoring the flames that licked at his suit. He dropped to his knees beside the figure. It was a woman. She was small, curled into a ball. Her clothes were torn and her hands were covered in soot and burns. He did not recognize her. She wasn't one of his staff. It didn't matter. He slipped his arms under her, gritting his teeth as the strain pulled at his back. He lifted her. She was dead weight, limp and fragile in his arms. "Hold on," he growled, the smoke searing his throat. The building gave a terrifying shudder. The main support beam overhead snapped with the sound of a cannon shot. Dante turned and ran. He moved with a strength born of pure adrenaline. Clutching the stranger to his chest, embers rained down on them, burning holes in the wet tarp. He navigated the maze of fallen crates, his lungs burning, his vision narrowing to a tunnel. He kicked the door open and burst out into the night air just as the roof of the east wing collapsed inward with a thunderous crash, sending a geyser of sparks into the sky. Dante stumbled, falling to his knees on the wet asphalt, gasping for air. He laid the woman down gently, shielding her from the falling ash with his own body. "EMTs," he screamed, his voice raw. "Get a medic over here." 2 paramedics rushed forward, pushing a gurney. Marco was right behind them, his gun drawn, looking at the woman with suspicion. "Who is she?" Marco demanded, looking at the unconscious figure. "She's not on the payroll." "Dante, she's wearing tactical gear. She's the one who did this. She's a spy." Dante ignored him. He stripped off his ruined jacket and balled it up under the woman's head. He looked down at her face, beneath the streaks of soot and the blood from a cut on her forehead. She looked young, terrified. As the medics began to check her vitals, the woman's hand twitched. Her fingers, burned and shaking, reached out blindly. They found the fabric of Dante's shirt. She gripped it, holding on with a desperate, unconscious strength. Dante stared at her hand. It was a small, fragile thing against his chest. He felt a strange, jarring sensation in his chest. Not anger, not fear, but something protective, primal. "She is a combatant." "Boss," Marco insisted, stepping closer. "We should finish it, or make her talk before the cops get here." Dante looked up at Marco, his eyes hard as flint. "Touch her and I will break your hand," Dante said, his voice low and deadly. Marco took a step back, stunned. "She's under my protection," Dante said, looking back down at the woman. He carefully pried her fingers from his shirt so the medics could lift her onto the gurney. "Take her to the penthouse, not the hospital. I want my personal doctor." "But boss, do it," Dante barked. He stood up, watching as they loaded her into the back of the ambulance that was on his private payroll. The warehouse behind him was a total loss, a monument to his failure. Millions of dollars were gone. His enemies would smell blood in the water by morning. But as he wiped the soot from his face, Dante Moretti was not thinking about the money. He was thinking about the way the stranger had held on to him, as if he were the only solid thing left in the world. He was the monster who had built this empire. But tonight, he had dragged something living out of the fire. He turned to the burning wreckage, his face grim. He would find out who she was. He would find out why she was here. But until then, she belonged to him. Consciousness returned to Lena Hart not as a flood, but as a slow, aching tide. The first sensation was softness, thread counts higher than anything she had ever felt against her skin. The second was the smell. It was clean, aggressively so, smelling of expensive linen, antiseptic, and the faint, woodsy scent of cedar. It was wrong. She should be smelling ash. She should be smelling the acrid chemical stink of the accelerant she had mixed with her own hands. She opened her eyes, blinking against the soft amber light of a lamp on a bedside table. The ceiling above her was high, shadowed, and crowned with crown molding that whispered of old money. She tried to sit up, but a sharp hiss of pain radiated from her ribs and down her left arm. She gasped, falling back against the pillows. "Easy," a voice rumbled from the shadows. Lena froze. The memory of the fire crashed into her mind, the heat, the roar of the collapsing roof, the strong arms lifting her. She turned her head. Dante Moretti sat in a wingback leather chair in the corner of the room, watching her. He had discarded his ruined suit jacket and tie. His white dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle and dusted with dark hair. He looked exhausted. a bruise darkening on his temple. But his gaze was alert, pinned to her face with the intensity of a predator, watching a rustle in the grass. "Where am I?" Lena croaked. Her throat felt like it had been scrubbed with sandpaper. "My home," Dante said. He stood and walked to the bedside, pouring a glass of water from a crystal carafe. He held it out to her. "Drink." Lena hesitated, then took the glass. Her hand trembled violently. The water was cool and soothing, washing away the taste of smoke. She handed the glass back, clutching the sheet to her chest. She looked down at herself. She was wearing a large, soft t-shirt that smelled like him. Her arm was bandaged heavily. "Why am I not in a hospital?" she asked, her voice gaining a fraction of strength. "Because hospitals ask questions I do not like to answer," Dante replied smoothly. "And because my private doctor is better than anyone you would find in an emergency room at 3 a.m. He leaned against the heavy oak dresser, crossing his arms. "Now, it is my turn for questions. Who are you?" The question hung in the air, heavy and dangerous. Lena felt her heart hammer against her bruised ribs. This was the man whose empire she had just set ablaze. This was the monster Miller had told her about, the man who ground people into dust for profit. If he knew who she was, if he knew she was the one who struck the match, she would not leave this room alive. She had to lie, and she had to lie perfectly. "My name is Sarah," she said, using the alias she had prepared for the job, though she had never intended to use it face-to-face with the boss. "Sarah Jenkins." "And what were you doing in my warehouse at 2 a.m? "Sarah," Dante asked. His voice was not angry, which made it more terrifying. It was curious, detached. "I am a temp," she lied, weaving the fabrication together with strands of truth. "I was hired through the agency to audit the shipping logs. The manager said the files were behind schedule and authorized overtime. I was in the back office when the alarms went off." She paused, letting the real fear seep into her voice. "It was not hard. The terror of the fire was still fresh in her veins. I tried to get out," she whispered, looking down at her bandaged arm. "But the door was jammed. Then the smoke came. I got turned around. I thought I was going to die in there." Dante watched her for a long silence. He was dissecting her, searching for a crack in the veneer. Lena held his gaze, willing her eyes to wide, innocent fear rather than guilty calculation. "You were wearing tactical boots," Dante observed quietly. "Not typical footwear for an accountant. I ride a motorcycle," Lena said quickly. "It is my only transport." Dante stared at her for another heartbeat, and then, miraculously, the tension in his shoulders eased. He let out a long breath, running a hand through his dark hair. "You are lucky. Sarah," he said, "another minute, and the roof would have been your grave." He believed her, or at least, he wanted to. He had saved her, dragged her out of hell himself. To believe she was the enemy would be to admit he had risked his life for the arsonist who burned his money. His pride was her shield. "Rest," Dante commanded, pushing away from the dresser. "The doctor will be back in the morning to change those dressings. Do not try to leave. My men are at the door, and they do not let anyone out without my say-so." He turned to leave, but stopped at the door, his hand on the brass knob. "I am sorry about what happened to you," he said, his voice dropping to a rough murmur. "No one who works for me should have to go through that." He walked out, closing the door with a soft click. Lena stared at the wood, guilt twisting in her gut like a knife. He had apologized to her. The man she was trying to destroy had apologized for the fire she had set. The next morning brought sunlight that felt too bright and a doctor who smelled too much like antiseptic. He was a nervous man with cold hands. When he reached out to peel back the gauze on Lena's arm, she flinched violently, pulling away with a gasp. The trauma of the fire, combined with the lingering memories of her brother's death, made the touch of a stranger feel like a threat. "Please." "I can do it," Lena stammered, clutching her arm to her chest. The doctor sighed, impatient. "Miss, I need to check for infection. If you do not sit still, leave us." The command came from the doorway. Dante was standing there, holding a mug of black coffee. He was dressed in fresh trousers and a dark knit sweater, looking less like a Mafia don and more like a man at home in his castle. "Boss, I need to—" The doctor started. "I said leave," Dante repeated, his tone brooking no argument. The doctor packed his bag and scurried out, closing the door behind him. Dante set the coffee down on the nightstand and picked up the fresh bandages and the jar of burn salve. He sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress dipped under his weight. "Give me your arm," he said. Lena hesitated. "I can do it. Your hands are shaking," Dante pointed out gently. "You will hurt yourself. Trust me. Trust him." The irony was bitter on her tongue, but she slowly extended her arm. Dante took her wrist. His hand was large, warm and rough. The skin of his palm was calloused, a testament to a life that had not always been spent in boardrooms. He worked with a surprising, focused delicacy. He peeled away the old gauze, his eyes narrowing slightly as he inspected the angry red burn that streaked her forearm. He dipped his fingers into the salve. It was cool and smelled of aloe and lidocaine when he touched her skin. Lena sucked in a sharp breath, her muscles tensing. Dante stopped immediately, his dark eyes flicking up to meet hers. "Did I hurt you?" "No," she whispered. "It just stings." He nodded and resumed, his touch lighter than air. He applied the salve in slow, rhythmic circles. Lena watched him. She saw the way his brow furrowed in concentration, the way his breathing slowed, up close. He was not the monster Miller described. He was just a man with eyelashes that cast long shadows on his cheekbones. A man who was treating her injury with a reverence she had not expected. "You have good hands," she murmured before she could stop herself. Dante paused, his thumb grazing the inside of her wrist, right over her pulse point. It was beating fast, betraying her. "I have done a lot of things with these hands," Dante said, his voice low and raspy. "Not all of them good, but I fix what I break, when I can." He began to wrap the fresh gauze, his movements efficient. Lena watched the play of muscles in his forearm, the way the dark knit of his sweater clung to his shoulders. There was a magnetic pull to him, a gravity that she was struggling to resist. "There," he said, securing the bandage. "Good as new." He did not let go of her hand immediately. For a second, they just sat there, skin connected, the silence between them charged with something thick and electric. Lena felt a flush rise to her cheeks. She should pull away. She should be planning her escape, but she did not want to move. "Thank you," she said softly. Dante released her hand and stood up abruptly, clearing his throat. The mask of the boss slid back into place. "Breakfast is in the kitchen. If you feel up to walking, join me. If not, I will have it brought in." "I can walk," Lena said, swinging her legs over the side of the bed. She stood, and her knees buckled. The room spun. Dante moved faster than thought. He was there, his arm wrapping around her waist, pulling her flush against his chest to steady her. She gasped, her hands instinctively clutching his biceps. He was solid, warm, and smelled of coffee and cedar. "Easy," he murmured, his face inches from hers. "I have got you." He held her there for a moment longer than necessary, his dark eyes searching hers. Lena felt the heat of his body seep into hers, melting the icy resolve she had built around her heart. "I have got you," he repeated, softer this time. The days bled into a strange, suspended reality. Lena was a prisoner in a gilded cage, but the door was unlocked. She spent her time recovering, learning the rhythms of the penthouse. It was a place of silence and shadows. Dante was often gone during the day, dealing with the fallout of the fire. But in the evenings, he was there. They developed a tentative, domestic dance. Lena would struggle to walk across the huge living room to the bookshelf, and without a word, Dante would appear to move a heavy ottoman out of her path. When she sat for dinner at the long mahogany table, he would pull out her chair, his hand lingering on the backrest for a second before he sat at the head. One rainy Tuesday, Lena sat in the kitchen at midnight, unable to sleep. The city lights of Port Argyle were blurred by the downpour against the glass. She was nursing a cup of tea, staring into the dark. Dante walked in. He had just returned from a meeting. He was still wearing his suit trousers and vest, his tie undone. He did not say a word. He simply walked to the coffee machine, brewed a fresh pot, and poured 2 mugs. He slid one across the granite island to her. "You should be sleeping," he said, leaning against the counter and taking a sip. "So should you," Lena countered, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. "The wolves do not sleep," Dante said dryly, "especially not when they smell smoke." Lena stiffened. Does it look bad? The business?" Dante looked at her, his expression unreadable. The warehouse was a significant loss, but money can be reprinted, buildings can be rebuilt. He took a slow drink, his eyes darkening. "It is the men I cannot replace," he said quietly. Lena felt the blood drain from her face. "Men? We found 3 bodies in the wreckage today," Dante said. "Night shift workers. They were in the break room in the basement. They never made it out." The mug slipped in Lena's hands, clattering loudly against the granite. Hot coffee sloshed onto her fingers, but she did not feel it. "Dead?" she whispered. "But the intel said the basement was storage. It was supposed to be empty." Dante frowned. "What intel?" Lena froze. She had slipped. Panic flared in her chest, hot and sharp. I heard the other accountants talking," she stammered, scrambling to cover her tracks. "They said the basement was just old files. I did not know anyone worked down there." Dante studied her for a terrifying second, then nodded slowly. "They were unauthorized. Sleeping on the job. It does not matter. They were my responsibility. And they burned because someone decided to play God with a match." He pushed off the counter, his jaw set in a hard line. "If I find the person who did it, Sarah, I will not just kill them. I will make them wish they had burned with the building." He walked out of the kitchen, leaving Lena alone with the sound of the rain and the crushing weight of 3 ghosts standing behind her. The guilt was a physical thing now, a stone in her stomach that made it hard to breathe. She retreated to the guest room, her hands shaking as she dug through the small bag of salvaged belongings Dante's men had brought her from the hospital. She found it sewn into the lining of her jeans, the burner phone. She turned it on. It vibrated instantly with a string of messages. Handler, Miller. "Why is the tracker static? Report, Handler, Miller. We know you were with him. Good work. Stay close. Handler, Miller. Next phase initiating. We need the layout of the casino vault." The phone buzzed in her hand. A call. "Miller," she answered, bringing the phone to her ear, her voice a hiss. "You did not tell me there were people in the basement," she whispered furiously. "You said it was empty." "Collateral damage." Miller's voice was tinny and cold. "It happens in war. Lena, do not get soft on me. 3 people died. Miller. 3 people with families. And how many people died because of Moretti's drugs?" Miller countered. "How many Tobys?" "Focus." "Lena, you are in the belly of the beast. This is the opportunity of a lifetime. Get me the codes for the casino security grid." "I cannot," Lena said, tears stinging her eyes. "I want out." "You do not get to walk out," Miller snapped. "You are an accessory to arson and triple homicide. You think Moretti will let you go if he finds out? You think the police will listen to your sob story? You belong to me. Lena, finish the job, or I send your file to the police and to Moretti." The line went dead. Lena sank to the floor, pulling her knees to her chest. She was trapped. On one side, the law and a manipulator who viewed lives as pawns. On the other, a man who had saved her life but promised to torture her to death if he knew the truth. 2 days later, the tension in the penthouse was palpable. Dante was on edge, pacing the living room, taking calls in Italian that sounded like arguments. Lena sat on the sofa, trying to read a book, but the words swam before her eyes. Suddenly, the balcony door opened. Marco stepped in from the terrace, bringing with him a gust of wind and the smell of cigarette smoke. The scent hit Lena like a physical blow. Instantly, she was back in the warehouse. The air was thick with black smoke. The heat was blistering her skin. She could hear the roar of the fire, the screaming of the metal. She could not breathe. She dropped the book. She scrambled backward, her back hitting the arm of the sofa. She clawed at her throat, gasping for air. "Fire!" she choked out. "Lena?" Dante's voice was distant, underwater. She could not see him. All she saw were flames. She scrambled up, running blindly toward the corner of the room, away from the smoke. She collided with the wall, sliding down it, her hands over her head. "No, no, no," she sobbed. rocking back and forth. I did not mean to. I did not mean to. Hands gripped her shoulders. Strong, firm hands. Sarah, look at me! She squeezed her eyes shut. I'm sorry, Toby. I am so sorry. Sarah! The voice was a command. She opened her eyes. Dante was kneeling in front of her. His face was inches from hers, his eyes dark and intense. He was gripping her shoulders hard enough to bruise, grounding her in the present. Breathe, he ordered. You are safe. There is no fire. It is just smoke from outside. Look at me, Lena gasped, her lungs seizing. She stared into his eyes, the only steady thing in a spinning world. Match my breathing, Dante said, his voice dropping to a low, rhythmic rumble. In, out. He inhaled slowly, exaggerating the motion. Lena tried to mimic him. Her breath hitched, ragged and broken, but she forced air into her lungs. In, out. That is it. Slowly. The room stopped spinning. The roar of the fire faded, replaced by the sound of her own heartbeat and the hum of the refrigerator. She slumped forward, exhausted, her forehead resting against Dante's chest. He did not pull away. He shifted his grip, one hand moving to the back of her head, his fingers threading through her hair. I am sorry, she whispered into his shirt. Do not apologize for fear, Dante murmured, his chin resting on the top of her head. Fear keeps you alive. He pulled back slightly so he could look at her face. His thumb brushed a tear from her cheek. Tell me what you saw, he said softly. Lena looked at him. She was so tired of lying, so tired of carrying the weight of her secrets alone. I saw the fire, she confessed, her voice trembling. I saw what I did. Dante frowned slightly, confusion flickering in his eyes. What you did? You survived. Sarah, that is all you did. No, she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. I have done things. Dante, things I cannot undo. I carry ghosts with me. She was confessing to the arson, to the deaths. But Dante, looking at the terrified woman in his arms, saw only a reflection of his own damage. He thought she was talking about the trauma of survival, the guilt of living when others died. We all carry ghosts, Dante said, his voice rough with an emotion Lena had never heard from him. You think you are the only one with blood on your soul? He leaned closer, his gaze dropping to her lips, then back to her eyes. I have done things that would make the devil pray, he whispered. I have made decisions that cost lives to save others. I have burned down worlds to protect my family. He cupped her face in his hands. His skin was warm, his touch possessive and tender all at once. Maybe we are both damaged, he said. Maybe we both deserve a second chance to get it right. The air between them crackled. It was not just gratitude anymore. It was not just protection. It was a raw, magnetic need. Lena felt herself leaning into him. She wanted him to kiss her. She wanted him to burn away the lies and the guilt. She saw his pupils dilate. He tilted his head, closing the distance. His breath ghosted against her lips, warm and smelling of whiskey. Dante, she breathed, her hand coming up to rest on his chest, right over his heart. He froze. For a second, she thought he would close the gap, but then a shadow passed over his face. The vulnerability vanished, replaced by a wall of steel. He pulled back abruptly, standing up and putting 3 feet of distance between them. No, he muttered, turning his back to her. I cannot do this. Dante, Lena asked, bereft, her hand falling to her side. Getting close to anyone is dangerous. Sarah, he said, his voice hard, in my world, weakness gets people killed, and you make me weak. He walked to the balcony door and locked it with a definitive click. Go to bed, he said without looking at her. He left the room, leaving Lena sitting on the floor, breathless, terrified, and more in love with the man she was supposed to destroy than she had ever thought possible. She touched her lips where his breath had lingered, knowing that she was now playing a game she could not possibly win. She had not just set fire to his empire. She was setting fire to herself. 3 weeks had passed since the fire, and the bruises on Lena Hart's body had faded to faint yellow echoes of the violence she had survived. The penthouse, once a cage, had transformed into a strange purgatory of luxury and tension. She could walk without pain now, her stride reclaiming the confident rhythm of the woman she used to be. But she was careful to keep her movements soft and hesitant when Dante was watching. Dante Moretti did not let her out of his sight. Under the guise of protection, he had integrated her into the daily rhythm of his empire. He claimed it was to keep her safe from the shadows that hunted them, but Lena suspected it was because he simply wanted her close. The morning light filtered through the bulletproof glass of Dante's home office, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Lena sat in a velvet armchair in the corner, a tablet resting on her knees. To the men in the room, 3 capos and a structural engineer, she was just Sarah, the recovering victim Dante had taken under his wing. A quiet presence, a decoration. But Lena was listening. "We need to cut the budget on the shipyard renovation, boss," the engineer said, tapping a blueprint spread across Dante's desk. "The fire at the warehouse set us back liquid assets by 30%. If we downgrade the ventilation systems in the new storage units, we save $200,000. Dante stood by the window, his back to the room. He wore a charcoal vest over a white shirt, his sleeves rolled up. He turned slowly, his face hard. "No," Dante said. "Boss, the numbers. I do not care about the numbers," Dante interrupted, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "We do not cut corners on safety. Not anymore. I want the best suppression systems money can buy. I want heat sensors in every corridor. I want emergency exits that actually open." "But the cost," the engineer protested. "If you mention the cost again, you will be looking for a new job," Dante said, leaning over the desk. "I will not have men burning to death on my watch because we wanted to save a few dollars. Do you understand?" The room went silent. The engineer nodded, pale and sweating. Lena stared at Dante, her chest tightening. This was the man Miller had described as a monster? A man who would burn the world for a profit? She watched Dante rub the bridge of his nose, the weight of the 3 dead workers from the warehouse still clearly pressing on his shoulders, while the men argued over the new schematics. Lena slipped her hand into her pocket. She activated the small recording device Miller had embedded in a lipstick case. She captured Dante's orders, the locations of the new shipments, and the names of his suppliers. She adjusted the tablet on her lap, angling it to take a photo of the open ledger on the desk while pretending to check her email. She hit send. The device vibrated, confirmation that the data was gone, that Miller had it. A wave of nausea rolled through her. Every time she sent a packet of intel, she felt like she was poisoning the air in the room. Dante was trying to be better. He was trying to protect his people, and she was handing the blueprint of his redemption to a man who wanted to destroy him. The sun was beginning to dip toward the horizon, painting the Port Argyle skyline in bruised purples and oranges. The penthouse was quiet, save for the hum of the city below. Dante walked into the living room, checking his watch. He was dressed in a dark coat, checking the load of a handgun before sliding it into his shoulder holster. "I have to go out," he said, not looking at her. "A meeting with the transport union. I will be back by 10. Lena looked up from the sofa. "Is it safe?" Dante paused, looking at her. A faint, wry smile touched his lips. "It is never safe, Sarah, but it is necessary. I am taking the north route to the industrial district. Marco is driving. We will be fine. The north route." The words triggered a cold spike in Lena's spine. 2 days ago, Miller had asked her specifically about Dante's preferred routes to the industrial district. She had told him Dante usually avoided the highway, preferring the surface streets near the old cannery. That was the north route. "Stay inside," Dante said. "Lock the door behind me." He left. The heavy steel door clicked shut, locking automatically. Lena sat frozen for a moment. Her heart began to hammer against her ribs. Miller had sold the intel. She knew it with a sickening certainty. The Rinaldi family, Dante's bitterest rivals, had been quiet lately, too quiet. She scrambled for her burner phone, her fingers shaking. She dialed Miller. It went to voicemail. She cursed, pacing the room. If she called Marco, he would trace the number. He already suspected her. If she did nothing, Dante was driving into a kill box. She checked the time. 7 o'clock. Traffic would be heavy. They would be slowing down near the underpass in 5 minutes. She made a choice. She opened a messaging app on her burner, one that routed through 3 different servers to mask the origin. She typed a single message to Dante's personal number, which she had stolen from his contacts days ago. Ambush at the underpass. Turn around. Blue van is waiting. She hit send. She stood in the middle of the silent penthouse, clutching the phone to her chest, waiting. 1 minute passed, then 5, then 10. The silence of the apartment transformed into a roaring void. Had he seen it? Did he ignore it? 30 minutes later, the elevator chimed. Lena spun around as the doors slid open. Dante stormed in. He looked like a storm cloud given human form. His coat was torn at the shoulder, and there was a streak of drying blood running from his temple down to his jaw. He was breathing hard, the adrenaline radiating off him in waves. Marco was behind him, shouting into a radio, but Dante ignored him. He slammed the front door shut and locked it, engaging the heavy deadbolts with a violent clatter. "Dante!" Lena cried out. She ran across the room, heedless of Marco's glare or the dangerous energy coming off Dante. She stopped inches from him, her hands hovering near his face. "You are bleeding," she whispered, her voice trembling. Dante stared down at her. His chest was heaving. His eyes were wide, the pupils blown black with shock and fury. "Who sent the text?" he demanded, his voice a rough growl. Lena froze. "What? Someone sent me a text," Dante shouted, the sound echoing off the high ceilings. Anonymous. "Warn me about the blue van. If I'd not swerved when I did, the RPG would have hit the car instead of the pavement behind us. Who knew I was on that route?" Lena swallowed hard. She could not tell him. She could not admit she knew because she was the leak. Maybe it was someone on the inside. She lied, her voice shaking. Someone who wanted to help you. Dante grabbed her upper arms. His grip was tight, desperate. He was not hurting her, but he was holding on to her as if she were the only thing keeping him upright. "I could have died tonight, Sarah," he said, his voice cracking. A few seconds later, "And I am dead. But you are not," Lena said, tears spilling over her lashes. "You are here. You are alive." She reached up, taking the cloth from her pocket that she had been using to clean her glasses. She pressed it gently to the cut on his temple. Dante flinched, then leaned into her touch. The fight seemed to drain out of him all at once, replaced by a crushing exhaustion. He closed his eyes, his forehead dropping to rest against hers. "Why did you run to me?" he whispered, his breath warm against her face. "You should have stayed back. I brought violence to the door. I could not just sit there." Lena snapped, the fear turning into a sharp, hot anger. "I was terrified you were not coming back. Do you think I care about safety? I care about you." The confession hung in the air between them, raw and undeniable. Dante's eyes snapped open. He looked at her, really looked at her, searching her face with an intensity that made her knees weak. "You should not care about me," he murmured. "I am a bad man." "Sarah, I do not see a bad man," Lena whispered, her hand moving from his temple to cup his jaw, her thumb brushing the rough stubble there. "I see the man who saved my life. I see the man who worries about his workers. I see you." Something inside Dante snapped. He moved with sudden, fluid intent. He stepped forward, forcing Lena to step back until her shoulders hit the wall of the hallway. He planted his hands on the wall on either side of her head, boxing her in. "Dante," Lena breathed, her heart racing so fast she thought it might explode. He stared at her mouth, the restraint he had been exercising for weeks, the careful distance, the polite walls, they all crumbled into dust. "Tell me to stop," he rasped, his voice dark with need. "Tell me to walk away, Sarah, because I cannot do it on my own. Not anymore. I do not want you to stop," Lena said. Dante let out a low, ragged sound. He closed the distance. His mouth captured hers, hungry and desperate. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a collision. It tasted of copper and adrenaline and fear. It was the kiss of 2 people who had almost died and were desperate to prove they were still alive. Lena gasped, her hands tangling in his dark hair, pulling him closer. She wanted to be consumed. She wanted to forget the lies, the handler, the fire. She wanted only this, the heat of him, the solid weight of his body against hers. Dante's hands moved from the wall to her waist, gripping her tightly, pulling her flush against him. He groaned into her mouth, deepening the kiss, his tongue sweeping against hers. It was intoxicating. It was dangerous. It was everything she had been running from and running toward. He broke the kiss, gasping for air, his forehead resting against hers again. His eyes were dark, burning with a fire that had nothing to do with arson. "Sarah," he whispered, his voice rough, "is this what you really want? You know who I am. You know what this life is." Lena looked up at him. She saw the vulnerability behind the brutality. She saw the man who had cleaned her burns and sat with her through the nightmares. "I want this," she said, her voice steady. "I want you." Dante let out a shuddering breath. He kissed her again, softer this time, a slow, lingering press of lips that promised everything. He swept her up into his arms, carrying her away from the hallway, away from the blood and the war outside, and into the sanctuary of the living room. Later. The penthouse was submerged in shadow. The only light came from the city grid below, casting long, pale rectangles across the floor. They lay on the oversized velvet couch, covered by a heavy woolen throw. Lena lay with her head on Dante's chest, listening to the slow, steady thrum of his heart. His arm was wrapped around her, his hand idly tracing circles on her bare shoulder. The frantic energy of the earlier hours had dissolved into a quiet, heavy peace. It was the eye of the hurricane, and Lena knew the storm wall was approaching. But for this moment, she refused to look at it. She ran her hand across his chest, feeling the scars that mapped his history. "Did it hurt?" she asked softly, touching the fresh bandage on his temple. "Not as much as thinking I would never see you again," Dante answered. His voice was deep, rumbling through his chest and into her ear. Lena closed her eyes, a sharp pang of guilt piercing the haze of contentment. He was talking about a future. He was talking about loss, and she was the one holding the knife that would cut his throat. "You should not trust me so much. Dante," she whispered, the warning slipping out before she could check it. Dante stopped tracing circles on her shoulder. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "I do not trust anyone, Sarah, but with you, it is different. You saw me in the fire. You saw the worst of it, and you did not run. That earns more trust than a lifetime of loyalty oaths." He tightened his arm around her. "Sleep. I have you." Lena nestled closer, burying her face in his neck to hide the tears that pricked her eyes. She felt cherished, she felt safe, and she felt like the biggest traitor in the history of the world. The morning brought a cold, gray light and a shift in the atmosphere. When Lena woke, she was alone on the couch. She sat up, pulling the blanket around her, feeling the cold air hit her skin. She found Dante in the kitchen. He was already dressed in a fresh suit, drinking espresso. He looked immaculate, the armor back in place. But when he saw her, his expression softened. "Good morning," he said. He walked over to her, tilting her chin up to kiss her gently. It was a possessive kiss, a claim. "I have to go to the precipice," he said. "We are tracking the leak, but I have doubled the guard on the floor. No one comes in or out without my direct approval." Marco is staying behind to watch the door personally. Lena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Doubled guards. Marco. She was locked down. You think they will come here?" she asked. "I think I am not taking chances with the things that matter to me," Dante said. He touched her cheek one last time and left. As soon as the door clicked shut, Lena's phone buzzed from where she had hidden it in the couch cushions. She stared at it. It felt like a bomb. She picked it up and answered, "You are getting too comfortable." Miller's voice spat from the speaker. He sounded furious. "I saved him," Lena whispered, moving to the bathroom and turning on the tap to mask her voice. "If I had not sent that text, he would be dead. And if he were dead, the job would be done," Miller shouted. "You are getting attached to the monster. Lena, I see it. Do not think I do not see it. You are forgetting who put your brother in the ground. He did not kill Toby," Lena hissed. "It was an accident. He is trying to fix the safety protocols. He is a criminal," Miller screamed, "and you are compromising the mission. But it does not matter. We are moving the timeline up. Lena gripped the edge of the sink. What do you mean? The casino, Miller said, his voice dropping to a cruel, satisfied calm. The Sapphire Room. Saturday night. It is the anniversary gala. The place will be packed. No, Lena said, horror washing over her. That is hundreds of people. Civilians. It is the heart of his operation, Miller said. We are going to stop it. I have a team ready to plant the charges, but I need you to get the service elevator override codes. I will not do it, Lena said, her voice shaking. I will not be part of a massacre. You will, Miller said, or I will release the footage of you setting the warehouse fire. I will send it to the police, and I will send it to Dante. And when he sees that the woman sleeping in his bed is the one who burned his money and killed his men, what do you think he will do to you? Lena stared at her reflection in the mirror. She looked pale, haunted. You have 24 hours, Miller said. Get me the codes, or everyone knows everything. The line went dead. Lena dropped the phone into the sink. She looked at her hands. They were trembling. She had thought she was fighting for justice. She had thought she was avenging her brother, but now she was standing on the edge of a cliff, and she had to choose. She could save herself and let hundreds of innocent people die in a fireball that would make the warehouse look like a candle. Or she could save the man she loved and the city he ruled and let the truth destroy her. She slid down the wall to the cold tile floor, burying her face in her hands, and for the first time since the fire, she wept not for her brother, but for herself. The double life was not a mask Lena Hart could take off at the end of the day. It was a second skin that was slowly suffocating her. For 3 days, she'd been feeding Miller a steady diet of static and half-truths. She sent him schedules for security rotations that she knew had been changed hours prior. She uploaded blueprints of the ventilation shafts that were outdated by 5 years, claiming they were the most current schematics she could find in Dante's office. Every time she pressed send on her burner phone, hidden deep inside a hollowed-out book on the history of Port Argyle architecture, her hands shook. She was buying time, but the currency was dangerous. Dante, she said one evening, looking up from her plate as they ate dinner in the quiet expanse of the penthouse. Dante looked at her. The bruise on his temple had faded to a sickly yellow, a reminder of the ambush he had barely survived. Yes. Sarah? I was reading the news. She lied, the taste of the falsehood bitter on her tongue. There is chatter online about the unions being restless. Maybe you should increase the perimeter checks at the casino, just to be safe. Dante paused, his fork hovering halfway to his mouth. He studied her, his dark eyes narrowing slightly. It was the same look he gave his lieutenants when they proposed a risky strategy, a mix of calculation and curiosity. The unions are paid, Dante said slowly, but instincts are rarely wrong. I will have Marco double the exterior patrols. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. His palm was warm, rough, and grounding. You worry too much, he said softly. I have reason to, Lena replied, and she squeezed his hand back, terrified that he would feel the pulse of her betrayal beating against his skin. In the glass-walled office down the hall, the atmosphere was far less tender. Marco stood before Dante's desk, a manila folder held loosely in his hand. He looked like a coiled spring, his patience eroded by days of suspicion. You need to look at this. Boss, Marco said, tossing the folder onto the mahogany surface. Dante did not reach for it immediately. He leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. I told you to leave it alone. Marco. And I told you that I do not trust coincidences, Marco countered, his voice sharp. Sarah Jenkins does not exist. The temp agency has a record of her. Sure, but it was created 6 months ago. Before that, nothing. No credit history, no rental agreements, no social media. She is a ghost. Dante. Dante stared at the folder. It sat there like an accusation. She is a victim of a fire, Dante said, his voice hard. Maybe she keeps to herself. Maybe she ran from a bad past. That does not make her an enemy. She was inside the warehouse at 2 a.m. wearing tactical boots. Marco pressed, leaning his knuckles on the desk. And ever since she got here, the Rinaldi crew has been one step ahead of us. Until the ambush. That ambush would have killed me if she had not warned me. Dante snapped. Or maybe she warned you because she needs you alive for something bigger. Marco shot back. Wake up. You are letting her into meetings. You are letting her see the books. You are thinking with your heart, not your head, and it is going to get us all killed. Dante stood up abruptly, the chair scraping loud against the floor. Get out! Marco straightened, his jaw clenched. I will go, but I am keeping eyes on her, and when she slips, I will be there to catch her. He turned and left, slamming the door. Dante stood alone in the silence, staring at the closed folder. He reached out, his fingers brushing the edge of the paper. He wanted to open it. Logic dictated that he open it, but looking at the file meant admitting that the woman who slept in his arms, the woman who made him feel human for the first time in a decade, might be a lie. He withdrew his hand. He would not open it. Not yet. The storm hit Port Argyll 2 nights later. It came off the ocean with the force of a hammer, wind howling against the skyscrapers and rain lashing the glass walls of the penthouse like bullets. At 9 o'clock, the power grid in the district failed. The penthouse plunged into darkness. The hum of the refrigerator died. The ambient city light that usually filtered in was erased by the thick, churning clouds outside. Dante found Lena in the living room, standing by the window, watching the lightning fork across the sky. He struck a match, the flare of sulfur brief and bright, and lit a heavy pillar candle on the coffee table. Then another. The room filled with a soft, flickering amber glow. The shadows danced on the walls, softening the sharp angles of the modern furniture. Come away from the glass, Dante said, gently. It is stormproof, but the sound is unsettling. Lena turned. In the candlelight, her eyes looked huge and dark. She moved to where he sat on the plush rug, sinking down beside him. They sat close, their knees touching, an island of warmth in the dark. Cold room. I used to love storms, Lena said quietly, pulling her knees to her chest. When I was a kid, my brother and I would build a fort out of sofa cushions and pretend we were on a ship at sea. Your brother? Dante asked. You have never mentioned him. Lena stiffened. She had walked into a minefield. He passed away a few years ago. Dante watched her face, the way the candlelight caught the sadness etched around her mouth. I am sorry. Sarah? He reached for the bottle of wine he had brought from the kitchen and poured 2 glasses, handing one to her. My father hated storms, Dante said, taking a sip. He grew up on the streets. Bad weather meant no work. No work meant no food. He taught me that the only thing that matters is a roof that does not leak and walls that do not burn. He swirled the wine in his glass, staring into the dark red liquid. We did not have forts, he continued, his voice dropping to a murmur. We had lessons. He would take me to the sites he managed. He wanted me to see how the city was built. He wanted me to know that we owned the concrete, the steel, the foundations. He sounds intense, Lena said carefully. He was a king in his own mind, Dante said. But kings leave messes for their sons to clean up. He looked at Lena, his gaze intense and unguarded in the dim light. There was a building on 4th Street. He said, a tenement. My father wanted the land for a new distribution center. The tenants refused to leave. Lena felt the blood freeze in her veins. 4th Street, the Sapphire Apartments. One night, a fire started. Dante said, his voice was flat, devoid of emotion, but his hand tightened around the wine glass until his knuckles turned white. It was supposed to be a scare tactic. Trash fires in the alley, but the wind changed. The building was old. It went up like kindling. Lena stopped breathing. The room seemed to spin. She could hear the phantom sirens. She could smell the smoke. She was staring at the man who had ordered the death of her family. I was 18. Dante whispered. I stood there and watched it burn. I heard the screams. I tried to run in, to help, but my father's men held me back. They told me it was just business. He looked up at her, and his eyes were swimming with a haunted, ancient pain. That was the night I learned what kind of man my father was. Dante confessed, and it was the night I promised myself that if I ever ran this city, I would never let that happen again. I have spent 10 years trying to wash the ash off my hands. Sarah, but I do not think it ever comes off. Lena stared at him. Her world was fracturing. She had built her entire existence around the hatred of the Moretti name. She had convinced herself that Dante was the architect of her misery, but the man sitting before her was not the arsonist. He was the boy who had been forced to watch. He was a man haunted by the same fire that haunted her. The realization was too much. It was a physical weight that crushed her lungs. I need a moment, she gasped. She scrambled to her feet, nearly knocking over her wine glass. She rushed to the bathroom, locking the door behind her with trembling hands. She turned on the faucet, letting the water roar into the basin to mask the sound of her sobs. She sank to the floor, pressing her forehead against the cool tile. She cried for Toby. She cried for the boy Dante had been. She cried for the impossible, twisted knot of love and vengeance that was tightening around her throat. How could she kill him? How could she destroy the only other person in the world who mourned that fire as deeply as she did? Minutes passed. She splashed cold water on her face, scrubbing at her red eyes until she looked somewhat composed. She opened the door. Dante was waiting in the hallway. He looked concerned, his body casting a long shadow in the candlelight. "Sarah," he asked, gently, "did I upset you?" "I should not have told you that. It is too dark." Lena looked at him. He thought she was upset by the story. He had no idea she was the wreckage left behind by that very event. She walked to him. She did not speak. She simply stepped into his space and wrapped her arms around his waist, burying her face in his chest. Dante froze for a second. Then his arms came around her, solid and warm. He rested his chin on the top of her head, holding her tight. "I am sorry," he murmured into her hair. "I am here. You are safe." Lena closed her eyes, letting his heartbeat drown out the screaming in her mind. He was comforting her for the pain he caused, and he did not even know it. It was the cruelest, most tender irony she had ever known. The storm cleared by morning, leaving the city scrubbed clean and bright, but inside the penthouse, the air was thick with unspoken threats. Dante left early for the docks, leaving Lena alone. She went to the kitchen to make coffee, her movements mechanical. She turned around to find Marco standing in the doorway. He was not smiling. "Good morning, Sarah," he said, making the name sound like an insult. "Marco," Lena said, keeping her voice steady, "I did not hear you come in. I am good at being quiet," Marco said. He walked into the kitchen, helping himself to an apple from the bowl on the island. He took a bite, chewing slowly, his eyes never leaving her face. "I used to work in counterintelligence." "Did you know that?" Marco asked casually. "Before the Morettis hired me. My job was to find people who did not want to be found." "That sounds interesting," Lena said, gripping the edge of the counter behind her. "It was," Marco said, "I learned that everyone makes mistakes, even the professionals. They slip up on details, they get dates wrong, they wear the wrong shoes to a temp job." He took a step closer, invading her personal space. "I know you are lying," he said, his voice dropping to a low hiss. "I do not know who you are working for yet. Maybe the feds, maybe Rinaldi, but I am going to find out. And when I do, Dante will not be there to save you." Lena lifted her chin. She channeled every ounce of the cold determination that had helped her plan the warehouse fire. "If you have proof, show it to him," Lena challenged, her voice icy. "But if you are just trying to scare me because you are jealous that he trusts me, then get out of my way." Marco laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. He leaned in, his face inches from hers. "Tick-tock. Sarah, your time is running out." He turned and walked away, leaving Lena shaking in the sunlight. She gripped the counter until her knuckles turned white. He was right. The walls were closing in. Her phone buzzed at noon. She retrieved it from the hollow book, a message from Miller. It was a schematic. Target the Sapphire Room, main casino floor, time, Saturday, 22 o'clock. Package, delivery at service entrance 4. You have the access codes. Plant it in the main HVAC intake. Lena stared at the screen, the HVAC intake. If a device went off there, it would not just damage the building, it would push the blast wave through the ventilation system. It would turn the entire casino floor into a pressure cooker. It was not sabotage. It was a massacre. Another message popped up. Miller, this ends the reign of terror. Do it for Toby, or I release the footage. Lena felt bile rise in her throat. This was not justice. This was slaughter. Miller did not care about Toby. He did not care about the victims. He just wanted to win. He wanted to be the king of the ashes. Dante returned in the afternoon, looking tired but calmer. Get dressed, he said. We are going to the casino. I need to inspect the floor before the gala tomorrow. Lena wanted to refuse. She wanted to run, but she nodded. The casino was a palace of noise and light, even in the afternoon. It was bustling. The slot machines sang their digital songs, and the air smelled of perfume and excitement. Dante walked through the floor like a monarch, but a benevolent one. Lena watched him. She saw a dealer wave at him, and Dante stopped to ask about the man's daughter. She saw him shake hands with the pit boss, laughing at a joke. She saw a waitress drop a tray of drinks, and instead of anger, Dante signaled a cleaner and told the terrified girl it was fine. These were real people. She looked at the ceiling, tracing the path of the HVAC ducts. She imagined the fire. She imagined the glass shattering. She imagined the waitress, the dealer, the tourists, all consumed by the same flames that had taken her brother. She looked at Dante. He was not a monster. He was a man holding a violent world together with his bare hands, trying to keep the chaos at bay. Are you okay? Dante asked, appearing at her side. You look pale. I am fine. She lied, just a headache. Let us go home, he said immediately, his hand touching the small of her back. Back at the penthouse, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the terrace. Dante led her out onto the balcony. The wind was cool, carrying the scent of the ocean. He turned her to face him, his hands cupping her face. You have been distant all day, he said softly. Marco says I am blind. Maybe I am, but I need to know. Sarah, do you regret coming here? Do you regret us? Lena looked up at him. The truth was a scream in her throat, but she swallowed it down. I do not regret us, she whispered. I never will. Dante searched her eyes, looking for the bottom of her soul. He leaned down and kissed her. It was not hungry like the last time. It was slow. It was tender. It felt like a vow. And to Lena, it felt like a goodbye. He pulled back, brushing his thumb across her cheek. I have some calls to make. Wait for me? Always, she said. He went inside. Lena remained on the balcony for a moment, the wind whipping her hair. Then she turned and walked into the guest room. She opened the closet. Hidden in the lining of her leather jacket was the package Miller's contact had dropped in her bag at the casino entrance, a small, dense block of plastic explosives with a remote trigger. She sat on the bed, holding the device. It was heavy. It was death in the palm of her hand. If she used it, she killed hundreds. She killed Dante's spirit, if not his body. She became the monster. If she did nothing, Miller exposed her. Dante would know she was the arsonist. He would hate her. He might kill her. Her hands trembled. She looked at the device, then at the burner phone. There was a third option. It was dangerous. It was likely suicide, but it was the only path that left her soul intact. She picked up the phone. She did not text Miller. She opened the technical schematics for the explosive device. She had been an engineering student before she was a logistics manager. She knew how circuits worked. She took a small toolkit from her bag. She would not plant the bomb in the HVAC system. She would not target the civilians. She would plant it where Miller was expecting to meet his Rinaldi contacts to watch the fireworks. She would trap the rats in their own maze. She began to rewire the timer, her tears falling silently onto the cold metal casing. She was going to save Dante's empire, and in doing so, she was going to burn her own life to the ground. The anonymous tip had been a single line of text sent from a spoofed number to Dante's private line at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Threat imminent. Sapphire room. Tonight. It was vague enough to be a prank, but specific enough to chill the blood of a man who lived by the sword. Dante Moretti did not take chances. He had tripled the security detail, placing sharpshooters on the mezzanine and plainclothes guards at every exit. He believed the Rinaldi family was finally making their move, a desperate grasp for territory on the anniversary of the casino's opening. He did not know the threat was standing right beside him in a silk emerald gown. Lena Hart stood in the center of the penthouse living room, fastening a diamond earring with fingers that felt like ice. She looked at her reflection. The woman in the mirror was beautiful, polished, and terrifyingly composed. She was also walking to her own execution. "Are you ready?" Dante asked. He walked into the room, adjusting the cuffs of his tuxedo. He looked like a prince of the city, dark, imposing, and lethargically dangerous. He caught her eye in the mirror and paused, his expression softening into that rare, guarded affection he reserved only for her. "You look breathtaking." "Sarah," he said quietly. Lena turned, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack her face. "Thank you." Dante stepped closer, resting his hands on her bare shoulders. His thumbs brushed her collarbone. "You are trembling. I am nervous." She lied. The threat. "What if something happens?" "Nothing will happen to you," Dante vowed, his voice low and fierce. "I have Marco watching the floor. I have men on the roof. I will burn this city to the ground before I let anyone touch you." The irony was a physical blow. He was promising to burn the city for her, while she was carrying the match that would ignite his world. "Let us go," she whispered. The Sapphire Room was a cathedral of vice and luxury. Crystal chandeliers dripping with light hung above a sea of velvet gaming tables and high rollers. The air smelled of expensive perfume, spun sugar, and money. Waitresses in shimmering flapper-style dresses navigated the crowd with trays of champagne, while a jazz band played a low, sultry tune on the stage. Dante moved through the room like a shark in a koi pond. People parted for him, offering nods of respect and fear. Lena stayed glued to his side, her clutch purse heavy in her hand. Inside the purse, beneath a compact and a tube of lipstick, was the device. She had rewired it. Miller had designed it to level the support columns and drop the ceiling on the guests. Lena had stripped the primary charge, leaving only the detonator and a small magnesium flashbang component. It would be loud. It would blow out the windows and fill the hallway with smoke. It would trigger the fire alarm and force an evacuation, but it would not kill anyone. It was a distraction, a signal flare to expose the rats. "I need to powder my nose," Lena said, leaning close to Dante's ear. Dante scanned the room, his eyes sharp. "I will have a guard escort you." "No," she said, placing a hand on his chest. "Please, I just need a moment alone. The ladies' room is right there. I will be fine." Dante hesitated, his protective instinct warring with his desire to give her space. "Fine. 5 minutes. If you are not back, I am coming in." Lena nodded and slipped away. She walked toward the restrooms, her heels clicking on the marble. But as soon as she rounded the corner, she ducked into the service corridor. It was empty, just as the shift rotation schedules she had stolen indicated. She moved quickly, her heart hammering against her ribs. She reached the maintenance access panel for the electrical grid. It was the perfect spot, isolated, connected to the alarm relays. She pulled the device from her purse. Her fingers flew over the keypad, setting the timer. 2 minutes. She stuck the device to the wall behind a stack of linen carts. "Forgive me, Dante," she whispered. She turned and ran. Not back to the casino floor, but toward the rear loading docks. That was where Miller would come in. When the blast went off and the panic started, the side doors would unlock for emergency egress. Miller and his team would use the chaos to slip inside, expecting to find a massacre. Instead, they would find an empty hallway and a woman who was done being a pawn. Lena reached the junction of the service corridor just as the timer hit 0. The explosion was not the earth-shattering roar Miller had intended. It was a sharp, concussive crump that shook the walls and blew the heavy service doors off their hinges. The sound was immediately followed by the shrieking wail of the fire alarms and the hiss of the sprinkler system engaging in the north wing. On the casino floor, the music stopped. Then, the screaming started. Lena pressed herself against the wall as a stampede of staff fled past her toward the exits. She waited, counting the seconds. Then she saw them. The heavy steel doors of the loading dock hissed open. 4 men stepped in, moving with tactical precision. They wore black tactical gear and gas masks. In the center was Miller. He was not wearing a mask. His face was twisted in a rictus of anticipation. Miller. Lena shouted, stepping out from the shadows. Miller froze. He raised his weapon, a suppressed submachine gun, and aimed it at her chest. "Lena?" he snapped. "You are supposed to be on the floor. Is it done? Did you drop the ceiling?" "It is done," Lena said, her voice shaking but defiant. "But nobody died. Miller, I changed the charge. It is just noise." Miller's face went purple. "You what?" "The police are on their way," Lena said, bluffing. "The evacuation has started. You need to leave, now, before you get caught." Miller laughed. It was a cold, ugly sound. "You stupid girl. You think I care about the police? We are not here to hide. We are here to finish it." He gestured to his men. "Kill the civilians," he ordered calmly. "Start with the VIP section. If Moretti is alive, save him for me. But burn the rest. We frame the syndicate for a terror attack. We control the narrative." Lena felt the blood drain from her face. No, that was not the plan. "You said—" "I lied," Miller sneered. He raised his gun. "Get her out of my way." Gunfire erupted, but it did not come from Miller. A door to Lena's right burst open. Dante's security team, alerted by the explosion and the breach at the loading dock, poured into the hallway. Dante was at the front. He saw Miller, he saw the guns, and he saw Lena standing in the middle of the kill zone. "Down!" Dante roared. He did not fire. He sprinted. He moved faster than Lena thought a human being could move. He crossed the 10 feet between them as Miller's men opened fire. Lena stood frozen, watching the muzzle flashes bloom like deadly flowers. Dante slammed into her, his momentum lifting her off her feet. He tackled her, driving them both behind the heavy oak bar of the service station just as the air where she had been standing was shredded by bullets. They hit the floor hard. Glass from the shelves above them shattered, raining down like diamonds. Dante covered her body with his own, his heavy tuxedo jacket shielding her from the shards. "Stay down," he shouted over the deafening roar of automatic fire. "Dante," Lena screamed, clutching his lapels. "They are going to kill everyone, I know," he snarled, pulling his own weapon from his shoulder holster. He popped up, fired 3 controlled shots over the bar, and ducked back down as wood splinters exploded around them. The hallway was a war zone. The deafening echo of gunfire bounced off the concrete walls. Smoke from the explosion drifted in, acrid and thick. Marco crawled toward them from the suppression position near the door. He was bleeding from a cut on his cheek, his eyes wild. "Boss, we are pinned down. They have heavy tech." "Call the SWAT team," Dante yelled. "Lock down the atrium. Do not let them onto the main floor." "I am trying," Marco shouted. Suddenly, Marco stopped. His gaze dropped to the floor between Dante and Lena. Lying on the linoleum, glowing in the dim emergency light, was Lena's burner phone. It had fallen from her clutch when Dante tackled her. The screen was cracked but active, and on the screen, clear as day, was the last message thread. "Me. Charge set. Timer active. Handler, good. Burn it down. Me. I am doing this for Toby." Marco stared at the phone. He looked at the message. Then he looked at Lena. The realization hit him with the force of a train. "You," Marco whispered. He snatched the phone up. He looked at the timestamp. 2 minutes ago. "Boss," Marco screamed, his voice cutting through the noise of the firefight. "Look at this." He shoved the phone into Dante's hand. "She is the one," Marco roared, pointing his gun at Lena's head. "She set the charge. She's been talking to them the whole time. She is the arsonist. Dante, she burned the warehouse." Dante froze. The bullets were still flying above them. The world was ending. But in that small space behind the bar, time stopped. Dante looked down at the phone. He read the words. "Charge set. Burn it down." He looked at Lena. His face, usually so guarded, so controlled, crumbled. The color drained from his skin, leaving him gray. He looked at her not with anger, but with a devastation so profound it looked like physical agony. He remembered dragging her from the fire. He remembered the smell of her burnt hair. He remembered holding her in the dark while she cried. He remembered telling her that he trusted her more than anyone. "Sarah?" he whispered. The name sounded like a question he already knew the answer to. Lena was crying. Tears streaked through the soot on her face, carving clean lines through the grime. She reached out to him, her hands trembling. "Dante, please," she sobbed. I did set the first fire. The warehouse. But not this. I tried to stop this. I rewired the bomb so it would not hurt anyone." "You set the fire?" Dante repeated, his voice hollow. "You burned my men? I didn't know they were there," Lena pleaded. "I was trying to hurt the business. I wanted justice." "Justice?" Dante asked. He looked at the phone again, then threw it against the wall. It shattered. The sound of the breaking plastic seemed louder than the gunshots. Dante stood up. He did not look at the bullets whizzing past. He looked only at her. The warmth she had seen in his eyes for weeks was gone. In its place was a black, bottomless void. "Get her out of here," Dante said to Marco. His voice was flat. "Dead, boss. We need to—" "Take her to the back office," Dante roared, the fury finally breaking through. "Lock her up. If she moves, shoot her." Marco grabbed Lena by the arm, hauling her to her feet roughly. "No, Dante, listen to me," Lena screamed as Marco dragged her backward. "They are going to kill everyone. Miller is crazy." Dante turned his back on her. He raised his gun and began firing at the attackers with a cold, mechanical precision. He was not fighting to survive anymore. He was fighting because he wanted to destroy something. "Dante!" Lena shrieked, fighting against Marco's grip. "My name isn't Sarah. It is Lena. Lena Hart. My brother was Toby Hart. He died in the Sapphire Apartments fire." Dante stopped firing. He stood perfectly still amidst the chaos. A bullet chipped the stone pillar inches from his head, but he did not flinch. He turned slowly. "What did you say?" he asked. Marco paused, holding Lena by the arm. "My brother." Lena wept, her body sagging. "He was 6 years old. He died in the tenement fire on 4th Street, the fire your family started. That is why I came here. That is why I burned your money. I wanted you to feel what it is like to lose everything." Dante stared at her. The memories he had confessed to her, the haunting guilt of his father's sins, the fire he had watched helplessly as a boy, crashed into the present. He had saved her from a fire. But 10 years ago, his family had put her in one. The revelation tore him open. It was a wound that went deeper than betrayal. It was a confirmation of his worst fear, that no matter how hard he tried to build something clean, the foundation was always made of ash and bone. He looked at Lena, his eyes filled with a torment that was terrifying to behold. He looked at the woman he loved and saw the monster he was. "Lock her up," Dante whispered. "Dante, please go," Dante shouted, the sound raw and tearing. He turned back to the hallway, raising his weapon and advancing on Miller's men with a reckless, suicidal fury. Marco dragged Lena away. She kicked and screamed, but he threw her into the manager's office at the end of the service corridor and slammed the heavy steel door. The lock engaged with a final, echoing thud. Lena threw herself against the door, pounding on the metal with her fists. "Dante, do not do this. They are setting you up." But there was no answer. Only the muffled sounds of gunfire and the wail of sirens approaching from the street outside. She slid down the door to the floor, burying her face in her knees. She had told him the truth. She had exposed the wound, and now she was trapped in the dark while the man she loved fought a war she had started, fueled by a hatred she no longer felt. Outside, the police cruisers screeched to a halt. Surrounding the building, blue and red lights flashed against the high windows. Miller, seeing the tide turn, signaled his men to fall back. He had what he needed. The bomb had gone off. The Moretti boss was engaged in a firefight. The narrative was set. He would slip out the back, leaving Dante to take the fall for the terror attack, and Lena to rot in prison as his accomplice, inside the office. Lena wiped her eyes. She saw a ventilation grate high on the wall. It was small. It was tight, but it was a way out. She stood up, her jaw setting. She was done crying. She had started this fire. Now, she was going to have to be the one to put it out. The Sapphire Room was no longer a palace of vice. It was a tomb waiting to be sealed. Outside. The world was awash of strobing blue and red lights. The police cordon had tightened around the building like a noose, the sirens wailing in a discordant harmony that vibrated against the shatterproof glass. Dante Moretti crouched behind a marble pillar near the main entrance, reloading his weapon with mechanical precision. His tuxedo was ruined, the white shirt stained with dust and blood, but his hands were steady. Beside him, Marco checked the ammunition count on his own pistol, his face grim. "We have a way out, boss," Marco hissed, his voice tight. "The sub-basement tunnel connects to the sewer grid. It leads to the harbor. If we go now, we can be on a boat to international waters in an hour." Dante looked at the gilded ceiling, at the chandeliers that still glittered mockingly above the wreckage of his anniversary gala. He thought of the empire he had built. He thought of the fear he had instilled in this city to keep the peace. And then he thought of Lena. He thought of the look in her eyes when she told him about her brother, the raw, jagged pain of a wound he had helped inflict 10 years ago. "If we run, they win," Dante said, his voice low. "Miller writes the history. He pins the bomb on us. He pins the fires on us. And he paints Sarah. He paints Lena as a terrorist. She is the enemy." "Dante," Marco snapped, "she betrayed you." "No," Dante said, snapping the magazine into place. "She woke me up." He stood up, adjusting his jacket. He was not leaving. He had spent his life building walls to keep the world out, but tonight, he was going to tear them down to let the truth in. In the locked manager's office at the end of the service corridor, Lena Hart was waging her own war. She had kicked the heavy oak chair until the legs splintered, giving her a jagged club of mahogany. She jammed the wood into the seam of the ceiling access panel, gritting her teeth as she leveraged her weight against it. "Come on," she grunted, sweat stinging her eyes. The metal groaned, then popped. The panel swung down, showering her with drywall dust. Lena did not hesitate. She dragged a filing cabinet over, climbed on top, and hauled herself into the dark, narrow throat of the ventilation system. It was tight, smelling of stale air and grease. The metal ducts cut into her knees, shredding the silk of her gown, but she crawled forward, fueled by a desperation that burned hotter than any fire. She had to stop Miller. She had to save Dante. She had to rewrite the ending of this story before the ink dried in blood. She navigated the maze of ducts, following the sound of voices. She knew the layout. She had studied the blueprints Dante had let her see. The main vent line ran directly over the atrium balcony. She reached a grate and peered through the slats. Below her, on the mezzanine level overlooking the casino floor, Miller stood with 2 men. One was a police captain Lena recognized from the news, a man who was supposed to be leading the siege outside. The other was a lieutenant from the Rinaldi family. Lena pulled her phone from her pocket. The screen was cracked, but the recording app was still open. She pressed record. "We need to wrap this up," the police captain said, looking nervous. "The SWAT team breaches in 5 minutes. Let them breach," Miller said, his voice dripping with arrogance. "Moretti is trapped on the floor. My men will flush him out, and the police will put him down. We plant the detonator on the girl's body. We say she was the radical, and Moretti was the mastermind. And the territory?" the Rinaldi lieutenant asked. "Yours. Miller promised. The Justice Group gets the credit for stopping the terror cell. You get the shipping routes, and I get the city." Lena's thumb hovered over the stop button. She had it. The confession, the conspiracy. She looked at the grate. It was held in place by 4 screws. She jammed the splintered chair leg into the mesh and kicked it with her heel. Once, twice. The grate gave way with a metallic clang that echoed through the atrium like a gunshot. On the casino floor, Dante stood in the open. He had walked out from behind the pillar, his hands held away from his body, his weapon lowered but ready. Miller, hearing the noise, looked over the railing of the mezzanine. He saw Dante standing amidst the overturned tables and shattered glass. "End of the line! Moretti!" Miller shouted down, his voice booming in the cavernous space. "There is no tunnel deep enough to hide you this time." Dante looked up. His eyes were cold. Dead things. "You talk too much for a dead man," Dante called back. "You think you can kill me and walk away? The city knows who I am. The city knows what I tell them," Miller sneered. And tomorrow, the papers will say you died trying to blow up your own casino to collect the insurance, killing hundreds, a tragic, greedy end to a monster. Dante tightened his grip on his gun. He was about to raise it, to invite the hail of bullets that would end his life. When a movement above Miller caught his eye, a figure dropped from the ceiling, landing in a crouch on the upper balcony behind Miller's group. It was Lena. Her emerald dress was torn, her face streaked with dust, but she looked like an avenging angel. She ran to the emergency command console on the wall, the one used for fire evacuations. She jammed her phone's speaker against the microphone and hit play. The feedback squealed for a split second, piercing the air, before Miller's voice thundered over the casino's PA system, loud enough for every soul inside and outside the building to hear. We plant the detonator on the girl's body. We say she was the radical, and Moretti was the mastermind. The justice group gets the credit. You get the shipping routes. The color drained from Miller's face. He spun around, seeing Lena standing by the console. "Shut it off," Miller screamed. The police captain looked at Miller, then at the Rinaldi lieutenant. The alliance shattered in a heartbeat. The Rinaldi man realized he was being recorded. The cop realized his career, and his freedom was over. Betrayal rippled through the room faster than a shockwave. Miller raised his gun toward Lena. Dante did not wait. He raised his weapon and fired. The shot went wide, sparking off the railing, but it forced Miller to duck. "Lena," Dante roared, "get down!" SWAT teams shattered the front glass doors, storming into the lobby. The confusion was absolute. Miller's mercenaries, realizing their paymaster had just confessed to a federal crime on the loudspeakers, hesitated. Some dropped their weapons, others panicked, opened fire on the police. Dante vaulted over a roulette table, sprinting toward the stairs. He had to get to her. Lena did not hide. She saw a mercenary raising a rifle toward Dante's back. She grabbed a heavy brass stanchion and hurled it over the railing. It struck the man in the shoulder, ruining his aim. The bullets chewed up the carpet inches from Dante's heels. Dante reached the mezzanine. He moved with a fluidity that was terrifying, dispatching a Rinaldi enforcer with a sharp blow to the jaw. He reached Lena. Grabbing her hand, they moved together. There was no need for words. The rhythm they had built in the penthouse, the way she anticipated his movements, the way he shielded her blind spots, translated perfectly into the violence of the moment. They were two halves of the same desperate soul, fighting for a breath of air. "Behind the bar!" Dante shouted, shoving her toward cover as glass exploded around them. They slid behind the heavy marble counter of the mezzanine bar. Dante checked his magazine. Empty. He tossed the gun aside and pulled a smaller backup piece from his ankle holster. "You came back," he said, looking at her. His chest was heaving, his eyes searching hers. "I never left," Lena said, grabbing a bottle of vodka and hurling it at a gunman trying to flank them. Miller appeared at the end of the bar. He was alone now, his allies having fled or surrendered. He was desperate, his eyes manic. He held a heavy pistol, and he leveled it squarely at Lena. "You ruined everything," Miller screamed. "It was perfect." He pulled the trigger. Dante did not think. He did not calculate the odds. He simply moved. He dove across Lena's body, his arms wrapping around her, shielding her with his own mass. The bullet struck him in the left shoulder. The impact spun him around. He grunted, a sound of sharp, sudden pain, but he did not fall. He used the momentum to lunge forward, crashing into Miller. They hit the floor. Miller tried to aim the gun again, but Dante was fueled by a rage that had been burning for 10 years. He slammed Miller's wrist against the floor, forcing the gun from his hand. He struck Miller once, hard, across the jaw. Miller went limp, unconscious. Dante knelt over him for a second, breathing hard. Then, the strength left his legs. He slumped sideways, collapsing against a marble column. "Dante!" Lena was there instantly. She dropped to her knees, her hands pressing frantically against the wound on his shoulder. Blood seeped between her fingers, dark and warm. "No, no, no!" she begged, her voice breaking. "Look at me! Stay with me!" Dante blinked. His vision was blurring at the edges. He looked up at her. She was crying. her tears falling onto his face, mixing with the dust and the blood. "You are okay?" he rasped. "I am fine," she sobbed. "You stupid, stubborn man. Why did you do that?" Dante managed a weak, crooked smile. "I dragged you out of the fire once," he whispered, his voice hitching. "I figured. I owed you one. Dante." "Please," Lena cried, pressing harder on the wound. The sirens were deafening now. Boots were thundering up the stairs. Police voices were shouting commands. "If this is it," Dante said, his eyes drifting shut for a moment before snapping open. "I am glad it was you. I am glad I got burned by you. Lena, better you than anyone else. Do not say goodbye," Lena demanded fiercely. "Do not you dare." Officers surrounded them. Weapons drawn. "Drop the gun. Hands in the air." Dante let his weapon clatter to the floor. He raised his good hand, keeping the other trapped under Lena's protective grip. He looked at the lead officer. It was not the corrupt captain, but a sergeant who looked honest and terrified. "The man on the floor is the architect," Dante said, his voice gaining a sudden, commanding clarity despite his pain. "He orchestrated the bombing. He orchestrated the fires." The officer looked at Lena. "And her? She is a witness," Dante said firmly. "She was working under duress. She saved the hostages. She is under my protection." "Dante," Lena started to protest. "Be quiet, Sarah," Dante commanded gently, using the name he had given her, the name of the woman he had saved. "Let me fix what I broke." He looked at her one last time, his eyes conveying a lifetime of apology and love, before the darkness finally pulled him under. The trial was the spectacle of the decade in Port Argyll, but the outcome was decided before the gavel fell. Dante Moretti provided the district attorney with everything: the ledgers, the names of the corrupt officials, the evidence against the Rinaldi family. He dismantled his own empire brick by brick. In exchange for his cooperation and his role in stopping the casino bombing, the domestic terrorism charges were dropped. He pleaded guilty to racketeering and illegal gambling. The sentence was 15 years, with parole, maybe 10. Lena Hart was not charged. The recording she had played proved she was acting to prevent mass casualties, and Dante's testimony painted her as a victim of Miller's manipulation. She walked free, but freedom felt empty. 18 months later, the visitation room at the state penitentiary was stark, smelling of bleach and despair, but the sun streamed through the high windows, creating squares of light on the linoleum floor. Lena sat on a metal stool. She wore a simple beige coat and jeans. Her hair had grown out, the harsh black dye fading back to her natural chestnut. She looked tired, but there was a peace in her eyes that had not been there before. On the other side of the thick plexiglass partition, Dante sat. He wore a blue uniform. His hair was shorter, and the sharp lines of his expensive suits were gone, revealing the man beneath. He looked younger, somehow. The weight of the crown was gone. "You look good," Dante said. His voice was tinny through the intercom, but the timbre still made her heart ache. "I am okay," Lena said. She placed her hand on the glass. Dante raised his hand, pressing his palm against hers from the other side. They sat there for a moment, connected by the barrier, feeling the ghost of warmth. "I got your letter," Dante said softly. "The one about the sunset over the harbor. I saw it from the new office." Lena said, "I am working with the Legal Aid Society now. We are helping the families from the 4th Street tenements get their settlements." Dante nodded slowly. "That is good. That is right. They are good people." "Dante," Lena said, "they just want to be safe." "I know," he said. "I am reading the books you sent, the philosophy. It is dense. You have time." Lena smiled sadly. "I have time." He agreed. He looked at her, his dark eyes searching her face, just as they had that first night in the penthouse. "You do not have to come here, Lena," he said quietly. "It is a long drive. You have a life to build. You should not be tethered to a ghost." Lena shook her head. Her fingers traced the outline of his hand on the glass. "I am not tethered to a ghost," she whispered. "I am waiting for the man who saved me." Dante swallowed hard, looking away for a moment to compose himself. "It is going to be a long wait." "I am patient," Lena said. "I learned from the best." The buzzer sounded, harsh and loud, signaling the end of the session. Dante stood up. He placed his hand against the glass one last time. "Walk in the light, Lena," he said. "I will," she promised, "and I will keep a light on for you." She watched him walk back toward the heavy steel doors. He did not look back. He walked with his head high, a man who had lost his kingdom but found his soul. Lena stood outside the prison gates a long time, the wind whipping her coat around her legs. She touched the glass of her car window, imagining the warmth of his hand was still there. She looked at the gray walls, then turned toward the road that led back to the city. The empire was ash. The money was gone. But as she drove into the uncertain light of the afternoon, Lena knew that something fragile and real had survived the fire, and for the first time in her life, she was not afraid of the burn. Thank you so much for listening to the story of Dante and Lena. It has been a journey of fire, betrayal, and redemption, and I hope you enjoyed the finale. I would love to know where you're tuning in from today. Are you listening from a rainy city like Port Argyle, or somewhere with a bit more sunshine? Please leave a comment down below and let me know. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories so you never miss an episode. We have so many more passionate, intense stories coming your way. And do not forget to share your thoughts on the ending in the comments. Did Dante deserve redemption? Would you have waited for him? Until next time, keep reading and stay safe.